Hey everybody, welcome into the podcast. We are back with another special bonus episode. And just in time for New Year's Eve. By the way, Brad, happy New Year's to you, buddy.
Yeah, man. It's craziness. We got a new president on the way. We've gotten Christmas out of the way. There's just all sorts of craziness going on.
Yeah, so this is coming we're recording this in November, just to let everybody know. This episode is dropping on December 31st, which means it's time for us to talk New Year's here. And we thought a lot about how to do a New Year's episode. And what we settled on was let's do a top 5 episode. And then the conversation became, all right, what's the top 5 going to be about? Because New Year's movies are kind of few and far between. And so we decided let's run with this concept of something new coming.
I will say, we did talk about the fact that When Harry Met Sally has one of our hands-down favorite New Year's scenes
absolutely.
In a movie.
Absolutely.
So we have to mention that.
We do. Go watch When Harry Met Sally. But what we settled on was, let's run with this concept of the new, and let's do a top 5 debut performances list. So Brad and I are going to walk through our personal top 5, breakthrough performances from somebody in their first movie. Now, Brad, there is such a huge list, a plethora of choices that we could choose from for this episode that I will say, I don't know if I necessarily think that my top 5 here is the, quote unquote, the best performances ever, or even necessarily my favorite performances ever. I think I just kind of looked at the list and picked out 5 that were really significant to me. Sometimes it's because the person ended up getting nominated for an Oscar or because it launched a huge career. Sometimes it genuinely is because they gave some of my favorite all-time performances. So I have a nice mix in mind. I don't know about you, Brad. Was this an easy or a hard list for you to make?
It was a little bit hard for me. I think a lot of actors get their start in smaller, lesser-known films. And so it can be hard because I'm like, oh, yeah, I know Matthew McConaughey. But then I look at the first movie he was ever in, and I'm like, nope, never heard of it.
Right. Well, I will say that this will be a theme between our lists, Brad, because there are some huge omissions that I left off as well. I mean, I don't have Edward Norton on my list. I don't have Natalie Portman on my list. I don't have, Tatum O'Neal on my list, and she was, she won an Oscar. I don't have James Dean on my list. So, just up front, we had to cut some people out. There are a ton of people worth mentioning. It doesn't mean we don't like their performances, but we wanted to go with something that was representative of ourselves and something that we thought was fun. And I guess on that note, Brad, we might as well just jump right into talking about our top 5 debut performances. So why don't you reveal to us who comes in at number 5 on your list?
Well, Bob, I think you're going to like this pick because it's a movie that I have, I think for 2 straight top 5 episodes put down. And that is the 2010 Coen Brothers True Grit.
Oh, nice.
I think that Haley Steinfeld, the young girl, it's the young girl that forces Rooster Cogburn off his lazy butt so that he can help her. I just think she was the best part of that movie.
She's incredible.
Hands down.
Absolutely incredible. And to this day, I mean, I've seen her in quite a few movies. She's a very talented actress. I don't think she's topped this performance yet. She was nominated for an Oscar for that movie, and you're absolutely right, Brad. She just steals every scene that she's in.
Yeah, I have not seen her in a single movie since True Grit, but I think she was great in this one, and when I found out that that was her first ever on-screen performance, I really was blown away, because you have some phenomenal A-list actors that she has put up against, and she just shines.
Yep. Brad, my number 5, I'm going to throw it all the way back to classic Hollywood, and I'm going to go with the 1953 film Roman Holiday, and my pick is Audrey Hepburn.
Oh, bro.
I rewatched this movie with my wife about 2 months ago. I hadn't seen it in years and years. I barely remembered anything about it. It is such a cute, charming movie, and Audrey Hepburn, just being honest here, Brad, will forever have my heart. I watched that movie, and I just fall in love with her. She's so, so good. And to just come out of the gate with this leading role where you're literally playing a princess. Everyone's fawning over you. Gregory Peck is chasing you around Rome, and she goes and wins the Oscar for it. It's just like, I can't think of many people who started out with a performance of this magnitude that just immediately set them right on top of the mountain. And she absolutely earns it with that movie.
Which of the cities visited did your highness enjoy the most?
Each in its own way.
Each in its own way was unforgettable. It would be difficult to... Rome. By all means, Rome. I will cherish my visit here in memory as long as I live.
Bob, I did not realize that Roman Holiday was Hepburn's first performance. She's probably in my top 5 favorite actors or actresses of all time. So I didn't realize that was her first film. I love that movie, and I love that you picked it for this list.
Brad, we are off to a great start here. So first of all, don't mess it up, all right? The ball's in your court now. But why don't you hit us with your number 4 pick for best debut performance?
Bob, I am jumping back with you to the 1950s, and I am talking about Leslie Caron in An American in Paris.
Oh, man, you're throwing it back to the beginning of our podcast here.
I was going to say, we're throwing it way back in a lot of different ways. I just think that she is charming and witty and sassy, and her performance in this movie is so sharp and so on point that I couldn't keep her off this list.
So she enters this movie as somebody making her screen debut who came over from France, who's classically trained in dance, and she's starring alongside Gene Kelly in a movie directed by Vincent Minnelli that goes on to win Best Picture. I mean, the pressure on her had to have been extraordinary, and you're right, she just absolutely sells it, and I think the fact that she was unknown to American audiences really kind of helped them lean into the fact that her character was a little bit more mysterious, that she had a secret that she was hiding. It's a fantastic performance in this movie that just absolutely, Minnelli lights her so well. The colors just pop. She really does shine in that movie.
Yeah, Bob, it was really easy to pick her and put her onto this list.
Oh, I'm sure, Brad. And for my number 4, I wanted to go in a little bit different of a direction. I could have picked somebody like Julie Andrews in Mary Poppins, which we just reviewed a few weeks ago here on the podcast. But I wanted to go with somebody that just really fit the role that they needed to fit. And so I was looking at the actor Barkhad Abdi from Captain Phillips, who played the lead pirate. He ended up getting nominated for Best Supporting Actor for that movie. But ultimately, he made my honorable mentions list. And the person that I thought even more fit the bill than he did was the South African actor Sharlto Copley in the movie District 9. Brad, I don't know if you've seen District 9. It is one of my favorite science fiction movies to come out of the 21st century. It has so much to say. It's an incredibly violent movie, but really, really moving. And Sharlto Copley has to play such a range of emotions in this movie as a guy who is slowly turning into this kind of alien creature. He plays up the body horror elements of it, but he also plays up the emotion. And I really, really think that he gives one of the best breakout performances of all time in this movie, District 9.
I will say I have not seen District 9. And as somebody who's watched a decent amount of sci-fi and kind of action films for over the last 20 years, it's a movie I've seen like previews for and I've seen at the library, and I've just never actually picked it up. So, Bob, I need to pick this movie up and give it a try.
I'm telling you, you will not be disappointed. I mean, like, on its surface, it is such an entertaining movie. But, beneath all that, it has a lot to say as well. And I really don't think you'll be disappointed if you give it a watch, Brad.
Well, there is a movie I know I wasn't disappointed in, and it is my number 3 favorite debut performance, Bob. I'm talking about what is widely considered the greatest film of all time, which, in my opinion, also has one of the greatest acting debuts of all time. We're talking about Orson Welles in Citizen Kane.
Oh, yeah.
Bob, this performance is the only word I can use to describe it is commanding.
Oh, for sure.
Like, Orson Welles just utterly controls the camera when he is on screen. He dominates every single second that you see him with his presence, with his timbre, with the way he uses his voice, with the way he uses his body. I mean, it's just utterly impressive to see him impersonate, William Randolph Hearst.
Brad, one of the things that continually blows my mind about Citizen Kane, it's everything about Citizen Kane, but one of the things that blows my mind is that generally when we see actors direct themselves, they don't often get the best performance when they're also the one directing. They always seem to do a very serviceable, very manageable job. But as the director of the movie, that person is usually worried about getting the performances out of everybody else. And they don't have as much of an opportunity to critique themselves when they're in front of the camera. And so you generally get like a B+ performance out of yourself when you're directing. Orson Welles' performance in this movie is the best that he ever was in any movie. And he was in some phenomenal movies, and he's a great actor. But Brad, I would honestly rank this performance probably in my top 10 to 20 movie performances of all time. And it was the first time he was ever on screen. It is a mind-blowing achievement what he was able to do with this movie.
Yeah, so let's see you top that one, Bob.
Well, for my number 3, Brad, I'm going with a performance that got a lot of critical attention, a lot of accolades, but I think has kind of been forgotten in the years since. And that is Kate Hudson in the 2000 film Almost Famous. To be honest with you, Brad, this might be my favorite debut performance of all time. Kate Hudson absolutely owns this character of Penny Lane, the groupie that follows around the band Stillwater in Almost Famous. And when I watch this movie, first of all, I can't believe that it's her first performance in a film because she is so assured every decision she makes is the right one. And she steals every scene she's in, but she's not playing over the top. She's just that magnetic of a screen presence. She did get nominated for an Oscar for this movie. She did not win. I think she absolutely deserved to win. But then when I look at Kate Hudson's career since then, I think she kind of got swallowed up in this glut of actresses in the early 2000s who were all competing for the same parts. I think she was probably competing against Reese Witherspoon for a lot of roles as well. Then, for a time, they both kind of ended up making the same generic rom-com. And I so wish that Kate Hudson would have been able to sink her teeth into more roles. And the fact that she wasn't able to, and that she didn't have the career that we all kind of wanted for her, has made us kind of forget about how great she is in this movie. But she is absolutely perfect. I wouldn't change a single thing about her performance in Almost Famous.
We are not groupies.
This is Penny Lane, man. Show some respect.
Groupies sleep with rock stars because they want to be near someone famous. We're here because of the music. We are Band-Aids.
She used to run a school for Band-Aids.
We don't have intercourse with these guys. We support the music. We inspire the music. We're here because of the music.
Bob, Almost Famous is one of those movies that growing up, what movie I related to? American Beauty. For the fact that if you're a kid growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, you went to Blockbuster a lot, or Family Video, or whatever your local video store was. And there was always those certain covers to a movie that just caught your eye.
And you remember them forever.
And you just remember them forever. American Beauty with the hand and the rose on the stomach.
Yep.
And honestly, Almost Famous with those big aviator sunglasses and kind of the curly blonde hair. It's just the cover of a movie that sticks in your brain. And you always go, I should watch that movie someday.
Well, we are going to get around to watching that movie next season, and I absolutely cannot wait to get into talking about that one. But Brad, it's actually time for us to hit pause on our top 5 and try our whiskey for the day. We're going to be sampling Stoll and Wolf Rye Whiskey. So what do you say we get into it?
Let's get to it.
All right, so today we are checking out a rye whiskey from Stoll and Wolf Distillery in Pennsylvania. Stoll and Wolf has a really interesting backstory,
Wait, Bob,
Brad.
you stole my wolf?
I did.
Oh, jeez.
I'm never giving it back.
I'm upset about that.
So Stoll and Wolf has a really interesting background. Part of their namesake, the Stoll part of it, refers to the distiller Dick Stoll, who worked for a long time with the Michter's distillery when it was still located in Pennsylvania. When Michter's closed down in the early 1990s, he actually left the whiskey business and just returned to it, was coaxed back in by his business partner, Eric Wolf. They've started this new distillery because they wanted to bring a distillery back to this area in Pennsylvania. For the last couple of years, Brad, they've been sourcing their product from MGP. And you know what's wrong with that? Nothing. There's nothing wrong with sourcing your product.
Nothing at all.
No, there's not. And we've said that many times here. A lot of people are very snooty about drinking sourced whiskey. And our policy on the Film and Whiskey podcast has always been, if it tastes good, we don't care how you came about it. And if they're sourcing it from MGP, so be it. MGP makes delicious whiskey. They are moving towards their own distillate now. I know they have a still that they're running pretty frequently now. They're trying to get their own stuff going. But what we're drinking here today, Brad, is their rye whiskey in a really, really beautiful kind of flask-shaped bottle. This is a 90 proof whiskey that has been aged just over 4 years, 52 months. So right at that point where, you know, we really get some good maturation on the rye. Brad, I know that you and I both like to drink young ryes sometimes, but this should be right in that kind of golden spot for a rye whiskey.
Yeah, as I nose this whiskey, it has a really nice syrupy smell to it that sometimes can go poorly for a whiskey. Like sometimes it has like a little bit of a, you know, high fructose corn syrup smell to it. That's not what I'm talking about here. It's almost like a cane sugar type sweetness to it.
Yeah.
That is really attractive. I will say though, I feel like I'm missing out on some classic rye spiciness on the nose that I'm hoping I find on the palate.
Yeah, Brad, I agree with you. This is not, it's not like a mapley syrup. I think for me, it's almost like a butterscotch or a salted caramel.
Yeah.
It doesn't have scotchy notes. So I don't want to, you know, I know sometimes when I say butterscotch, you would immediately think scotch, but it doesn't have scotch notes on it as much as it's just like that, you know, almost like a sundae topping kind of syrup. But you're right, Brad. There's not a lot of rye going on here. It definitely smells on the sweeter end. It has a nice creaminess to it on the nose. I'm really liking it so far.
Yeah, it's a fascinating nose, and I'm excited to get into the flavor.
Wow. Oh, that's really good, Brad. I would say that the creaminess really comes through. It tastes kind of like a piece of cheesecake with some caramel on top of it. I don't know if I'd call it butterscotch so much on the taste as like a creamy and caramely flavor. And then on the very back end, the rye spice starts to hit you a little bit. Right when you swallow, you get a little bit of rye grain, and then you also get a nice kind of earthy, herbal quality to it as well. I don't know if I'd go so far as to call it a mint as much as I would say earthy, almost like a grassy kind of last little note that you get there. But from front to back across the palate, it's really pleasant.
Yeah, Bob, it's a very smooth rye, probably one of the smoothest that I've ever had. I will say, though, I feel like it's just lacking a little bit of something on the flavor category. Like, there's a sweetness there, but I'm not getting enough spiciness to really draw me in and keep me with this whiskey.
Yeah, I would definitely call this a bourbon drinker's rye because on the front, I'd say the front half of my palate, it reminds me a lot of the Chattanooga 111 that we had about a year ago, and because the dominant note that I got on that was caramel cheesecake as well. It doesn't really become a rye until it hits the back of your palate, and then on the finish, you get a bit of rye grain as well. I think what this is honestly missing, Brad, is a little bit higher proof. I think that it's a very easy drinker at 90 proof. It drinks closer to an 80 proof. It's really thin, and the alcohol doesn't really make itself known hardly at all. I have absolutely no chest burn on the way down, so we're not getting any sort of a Kentucky hug. And I'm wondering if a higher proof might add a little something to this. But in terms of the flavor component, I think they've got the flavor locked down. It just does seem to be lacking maybe a little bit of a punch from the alcohol.
A little bit of character.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I feel like it's not distinguishing itself in any specific way, but it is all around a very pleasant rye whiskey.
Yeah, and I will kind of push back a little bit, Brad, because I think I might be enjoying this a bit more than you. I actually would put this kind of like in my upper tier of ryes. And the funny thing is, I don't think we've ever had two ryes on this podcast that have tasted similar to each other. Rye just seems to have, it's like a blank canvas that you can make whatever you want with. I'm thinking back to a few months ago when we did the Belfour rye, and we were getting like mint and almost like a weed characteristic on that one. This one is not like that at all. It's very, very creamy, which is not something we usually get on a rye. I would sit outside on my porch on a summer day and drink through like half a bottle of this. This seems like the kind of rye that you could sip on all day, to the point where you may drink a little more than you initially intended to when you sat down. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I had to score this out, I would probably end up in like the 28 to 31 out of 50 category. Where do you feel like you would end up?
Yeah, I think I'd be closer to like a 35 to 36 on this, Brad. I actually really, really like this. Again, we did not have to pay for this bottle, so we're not factoring in the value component so much here. And we want to say thank you to Stolen Wolf for providing us with these bottles. Brad, I am a big fan of this, and I actually would highly recommend. I think this is an excellent rye, not just for the beginner rye drinker, but for the experienced rye drinker, as long as you go into it knowing that this is going to be your everyday sipper. It's not going to be a special occasion rye that kind of knocks your socks off in small doses. This is just a nice, solid, everyday drinker.
Yeah, I think that I've kind of held back on my overall enthusiasm for it a little too much, maybe. It's a really good whiskey. I think they have something really good going on over at Stolen Wolf. I just think that there's a little bit of room for growth, a little bit of room for complexity that would honestly knock this whiskey into the next level, the next strata of quality.
All right, well, it seems like we're a little bit divided on this one, but still overall a really, really great experience. I think if you live in the Pennsylvania area, you honestly should check out Stolen Wolf, if nothing else, just for the bottle design alone, which I am really digging on my shelf. But I think that the juice inside is equally as good. So, Brad, what do you say we get back to talking about our top 5 debut performances?
Let's get to it.
All right, so that was Stolen Wolf Rye Whiskey. We are getting back into talking about our top 5 debut performances. It's time for our number 2 and number 1 selections. So, Brad, do you want to go first, or do you want me to jump in?
I'll roll right in, Bob. This is one of my favorite performances from one of my favorite movies of all time. You better know that I am talking about Star Wars, 1977, and we are talking Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
I just think he plays the character of Luke so well in this movie and sets the stage for this epic saga to come that his performance is amazing. I think he plays kind of that spoiled teenager who just has some growing up to do. And upon meeting Obi-Wan and Han Solo and Chewie and going on his adventure, you see him grow up to face the challenges around him. Mm-hmm. And I just think that his performance is stunning.
He has become so synonymous with that role, and Star Wars has become so synonymous with him that it's hard to imagine anybody else ever playing that role. You know what I mean? Like, any quibbles that I might have with him as an actor, and especially in A New Hope, I think I also have to acknowledge that he just is Luke Skywalker. Like, the movie landscape was changed forever as a result of that movie. And I can't even imagine, like, oh, what if they had put this person in instead of him? No, he just is Luke Skywalker. And for this to be his first film, I think is all the more remarkable.
That is really what blows my mind, is that with all of the problems that they had on set with filming in Tunisia and all of these different issues, Hamill was still able to give such a convincing and just powerful performance. It really was a performance for the ages.
Well, for my number 2, Brad, I am going very close in time to your release. I'm going to go with the 1978 film Halloween, and I'm picking Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode. She practically invented the idea of the final girl in a horror picture. She absolutely owns this movie. The specter of this guy, Michael Myers, is hanging over the entire film. She so thoroughly convinces you that she is this just kind of small town high school babysitter, and she's not dumb, and she knows exactly what to do. And at the same time, like when she's hiding in a closet and she's terrified of Michael Myers and she's just kind of using whatever's at her disposal to try to get, him from stabbing her, you're entirely on board. Like she plays it so naturalistic. And while every other subsequent movie tried to turn Michael Myers into this invincible killing machine and tried to turn Laurie into like a superhero by extension, what I loved about the first Halloween movie is that she just is a regular girl. She doesn't know how to fight this psychotic killer. and she feels real fear because of it. And I am along for the ride with her throughout that whole movie. You know, again, it's one of those movies that it changed the landscape of American cinema. It really launched or relaunched this idea of the slasher film in a way that we are still seeing the effects of now. So yeah, my number 2 debut performance, Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween.
Bob, every word that you just used to describe that movie sounds exactly why I just don't like slasher films. Not my style.
I get it, man. I totally get it.
I'm like have zero interest in ever seeing Halloween.
Oh, see, I think you would actually like it, Brad. I really do. Especially now that we've watched, her mom, Janet Leigh, in Psycho. I really think that you would enjoy watching Halloween. It doesn't lean into the incredibly gory stuff that you get from the late 80s sequels where they just go over the top with it. It's really restrained. It's a low budget movie where you can sense the kind of independent filmmaking. I really think you'd like it if you gave it a shot.
Well, regardless of whether or not I would like it, I'm going to stick with the holiday theme that you've pushed us towards, Bob, and I'm going to talk about one of my absolute favorite Christmas movies of all time, and that film would be Die Hard, starring not Bruce Willis. I'm talking Alan freaking Rickman.
Hans Gruber.
Bob, he just chews every single bit of scenery in every single scene that he's in, and I freaking love it. I was hard pressed to believe that this was Alan Rickman's first ever movie performance, and I just think he nails it in this movie.
Oh, he's one of the best villains of all time. And, if you'd like to hear us talk more about Die Hard, it was one of our most recent episodes. So after you're done listening to this episode, go back and listen to our episode on Die Hard. But Brad, I think when it comes to Alan Rickman, this is the benefit of not debuting in a film until you're like in your 40s. Like, he was an experienced actor at this point. And it just seems like he leapfrogged over all of the early movie hiccups that most actors have. And I know what you mean when you say that he chews scenery in this movie, but at the same time, I don't feel like his performance is totally over the top. Like, he seems like the kind of character that fits right in a 1980s movie about a skyscraper blowing up and everyone inside of it is doing cocaine. Like, which is what that movie's about. Like, he fits right in, and I don't think that he is going like above and beyond what everybody else is doing in a distracting kind of way in this movie.
I was going to say, maybe I feel like he's chewing scenery because it's the 1980s and it's the worst decade ever for movies.
I like how even in your number 1 overall performance, you can't help but just get a little dig at the 1980s.
I will never stop taking digs at the 1980s. The hair was terrible. Everybody was doing drugs. The music was not great. I don't understand this fascination with the 1980s.
Well, Brad, for my number 1, I don't have too much more to say because it's one that you already alluded to in your top 5 list. My number 1 performance, I couldn't pick anybody else but Orson Welles in Citizen Kane. Am I saying it's my favorite debut performance of all time? I'm not. Am I saying it's the greatest one? Maybe, but I don't think that there is another one that is more of an accomplishment or a feat than this one. You're talking about a guy who makes arguably the greatest film of all time, who writes it, who directs it, and who stars in it. And he does all 3 of those things impeccably, and he does it at the age of 25 years old.
I think I should remind you of a fact that you seem to have forgotten.
Yes.
That you are yourself one of the largest individual stockholders in the Public Transit Company.
The trouble is you don't realize you're talking to 2 people. As Charles Foster Kane, who owns 82,364 shares of Public Transit Preferred, you see, I do have a general idea of my holdings. I sympathize with you. Charles Foster Kane is a scoundrel. His paper should be run out of town. A committee should be formed to boycott him. You may, if you can form such a committee, put me down for a contribution of $1,000.
My time's
On the other hand, I am the
wasted
publisher of the Inquirer. As such, it's my duty, and I'll let you in on a little secret. It's also my pleasure to see to it that decent, hard-working people in this community aren't robbed blind by a pack of money-mad pirates just because they haven't anybody to look after their interests.
Every time I think about the story of the production of this movie, Brad, I can't wrap my mind around it. You would think that he would be bad at one of those three things, or at least that we'd be able to see that he was a 25-year-old at one of those three things. But no, I mean, it's pitch perfect in the direction, in the writing, and especially in that performance. He convincingly plays Charles Foster Kane from basically age 20 to age 70 or whatever he ages to. And you buy every second of that performance. I don't think film will ever see a debut performance as dominant as that one.
Yeah, Bob, there's literally nothing I can imagine. Like I said, it's just one of the most commanding, engaging performances I've ever seen. And I can't fault you in any way, shape, or form for putting it as your number one debut performance. But in the end, we want to know what you have to say about this. Please find us on our social medias at Film Whiskey.
Or if you want to give us a phone call, tell us what your favorite debut performance might be, you can do so at our voicemail box at 216-800-5923. Once again, that number is 216-800-5923. Or you can leave us a message directly on our website at anchor.fm/filmwhiskey.
Next week, we'll be back with our regularly scheduled episode. But until then, I'm Brad G.
I'm Bob Book, and we are wishing you a very happy New Year.